Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game and has just started growing a moustache for Movember. I'm Kevin Day and he is Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I assume Manscaped won't mind that I shall be hairy at one end and you'll be smoother than Gary Lineker at the other.
Oh, I sincerely hope not. And if you want to try out Manscaped, of course, you use the code word price of football. You'll get a 20% discount. I actually, I was doing the pumpkins for the local kids last night, so I've used loads of stencils.
I'm sorry,
and I had a stencil over.
Kieran, I'm going to have to stop you there. You can't see me, so in general, can you try not to say things like I was doing the pumpkins when I've got a mouthful of tea? Because I literally have just spat that mouthful of tea out of the thought of you doing the pumpkins. Anyway, so you're shaving pumpkins, are we saying here?
Well, no, I was cutting the pumpkins, and these days you get stencils for your pumpkins.
Good God, dude.
And I had a spare one, so I used my Manscaped with it, and now I've got a picture of a witch where you wouldn't normally expect to have a picture of a witch.
I'd put the cup down just to... Sorry, yeah, so it went from pumpkins to little mini marrows, basically.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. What does the Baroness think about you having a hubble bubble toil and trouble shaved into you? That took a different direction to the one I was imagining. It's questions day, Kieran, but we do have a couple of news stories. And the first one is news, or it's rumours of news, of a Burnley takeover, to which every football fan on Twitter seemed to say, no, for God's sake, no, Burnley, walk away. Why is that?
Well, this apparently has been rummaging around for a whole year. It's an Egyptian investor called Mohammed Al-Kashashi. I think the reason why people are a bit reticent for Burnley to get involved, everybody seems to be warning them off, is the involvement of Mr. Chris Farnell.
Yes.
Now, we've spoken about Chris on a few occasions in respect to the takeover or prospective takeover at Charlton Athletic, which didn't go particularly well.
Yeah.
And it's very weird what's happening in respect of this guy, because he failed the owners and directors test as far as the EFL was concerned. And then 5 weeks later, they said he's okay. Now, yeah, we talk about wrong-uns, and for me, if you were a wrong-un, it's normally a fairly long-term status. So to be a wrong-un for 5 weeks does seem a bit of a strange one. But apparently, according to the reports I've read, he is still under investigation from the Solicitors Regulation Authority with regards to his conduct in respect of Charlton Athletic. So Burnley didn't spend any money in the transfer window. They don't normally spend a lot of money in the transfer window. So I think the fan base is torn between mysterious Middle Eastern investors, of which some have been very successful and some haven't. But we'll have to wait and see how this one goes. But the asking price is apparently 200 million quid.
Wow. I say wow, is that a lot?
I think for a club that's presently in the bottom three or close to the bottom three, you're taking a bit of a gamble, because clubs in the Championship normally go for somewhere in the region of 20 to 50 million. 200 million for a club that's secure in the Premier League, I would say, is a fair price. And to be fair to Burnley, that they have probably punched above their weight for the last 5 or 6 seasons since they were promoted. But in the middle of a pandemic and with a pretty weak start to the season, that price to me seems at the top end.
Yeah, you mentioned that they don't normally spend a lot of money in the summer, Burnley. They're normally quite canny with their signings, but of course the fact that they spent virtually nothing is playing into the conspiracy theories. And people look at Sean Dyche's face and go, "Yeah, that club's definitely been sold." You can tell by the way he's leaning on his left foot, but there is just a conspiracy theory. I mean, they're not a club renowned for spending money, so there's no reason to believe they didn't spend money because this guy was attempting to buy it then.
No. I mean, if you take a look at the present owners, they've never put a penny into the club since taking it over. Burnley have been hit by the pandemic, as has of all clubs, in terms of the main forms of income coming in. But they're not the only club that's being linked with a takeover, because on Friday, and we've not mentioned them for days, I suspect, Derby County. They also have potential Middle Eastern investment with Sheikh Khalid bin Zayed, who is a relative of Manchester City's owners. He's previously tried to acquire both Liverpool and Newcastle. That's not been successful. He's set up a company called Derventio Holdings Limited, and the existing owner, Mel Morris, who has spaffed, I think it's fair to say, a huge sum of money in his love for the club, and he is a devoted Derby fan, but they've lost 120 million quid in 5 years. I think he's now reached the stage where he can't really put in much more because it's draining him out.
And that will be the last time we mention Derby on this pod until the very first question, in fact. But before that, another bit of news, Kieran, and it's big news for fans of lower league football who love pizza.
It is indeed, because after such highly regarded names as Freight Rover, Sherpa Van, Autoglass, LDV Vans, Johnson Paint and Checkatrade, and of course, we cannot forget leasing.com. We've got Papa John's as the official sponsors of the EFL Trophy. And an EFL Trophy gets a lot of stick because nobody's interested in it in the early rounds, but it does give normally young players an opportunity to play. And the present holders, Portsmouth, when they won at Wembley in 2019, because the trophy was effectively abandoned last season, there was 85,000 people at Wembley to see them defeat Sunderland. So it can certainly at the very final stages attract a bit of interest. It's a bit of a lost sheep in terms of sort of the love affair for the trophy, but if it brings more money into EFL clubs, then we're all for it.
Yeah, it's also going to be a boon for those pundits and television football commentators who love a pun as well. I imagine as we speak, somebody will be looking for a team that hasn't won for 4 seasons.
Hey!
Thank you. I got bored after that, to be perfectly honest. The Rolodex was flipping around, but then I got bored. I realised the world's going to hell. It doesn't need any more pizza puns. But it would be quite pleasant though if at the end of the final the trophy was delivered on a moped. That would be lovely, wouldn't it? In a little cardboard box, and then you got £1 off because they turned up late. Our first question, and already there's been a spoiler alert. Our first question, Kieran, is about Derby County. And it's from Ben Dale, who's an accountant and football fan. And Ben says, this show ticks all my boxes. Ben, if this show ticks all your boxes, I really do worry about what's happening in the rest of your life. But Ben says, thank you for the pod and thank you for this question, Ben. It's actually a good question because it ties up some loose ends about something we've spoken about a lot recently, which is Derby and Sheffield Wednesday. But what Ben would like to know is, the current legal ownership of Pride Park and Hillsborough, after all the shenanigans that you described, do they now belong to the club's owners? And if so, in years to come, if Premier League football is still not achieved, could the owners cash in and just sell the stadium land for redevelopment?
Well, the simple question is yes, they could. Pride Park is owned by a company called Gelor Nuco 202 Limited, which really rolls off the tongue. And that was sold by Derby County Football Club for £81.1 million because the owners of Gelor Nuco, they'd seen some of the success that Derby had previously with things such as the monster truck competition held at the stadium. And they felt that justified the price because they felt that there was a gap in the market for similar events, especially if they put a sliding roof over the top of the stadium. Right. The owner of Gelor Nuco, Mel Morris, who happens coincidentally to be the owner of Derby County Football Club, could sell the football club without the stadium. All right. So he could effectively be the landlord, or he could sell the stadium without the football club. Right. In terms of getting bored and selling it for development, that's always a potential, regardless of who the owner is, because ultimately, if you've got an owner who wants to make money out of the football ground, and we have seen that on numerous occasions, that they could, even if the football club owns the ground, they can try to shift the club's facilities elsewhere. So we'll have to wait to see what happens on this. We've always said we're never comfortable about separation of ground from stadium if it goes too far. Hillsborough is owned by a company called Sheffield 3 Limited, owned by Delphine Chancery. And if you are buying or selling a club, what we would always advise you is to check the small print. As former Palace owner Mark Goldberg, who again we've mentioned on a few occasions, really is probably ruined to this day.
Yes. Yeah, because he ended up owning the leasehold to the club and the ground, but not the freehold. Yeah, so there was nothing he could do, basically, without Ron Node's permission. Okay, Kieran, our second question. I think this could be your perfect Price of Football podcast question, Kieran, because it contains Derby County and amortisation. That's right up your street, isn't it?
Bingo. That's a full house, isn't
absolutely, it? Yeah. Philip Hawkins says, my question is about the Derby County amortisation case. And that comes as no surprise. I just gave away that as a second spoiler alert. I've failed to give this pod already. Philip says, I understand how and why accountants were allowed to spread player costs to backload the financial burden, but could a club do it in the other direction? In other words, if they had a good season and know that there are big transfers coming following submission of accounts, could they front-load amortisation costs in the same manner? Is that just a fancy way of saying can they pay more in advance on a transfer fee?
From an accounting point of view, yes. What appears to be the case now is that you can, given that the charges against Derby County were found to be innocent, and the club was cleared of all that was laid at them by the EFL. If this is now deemed to be acceptable, you can have as much fun with the numbers as you so desire. Right. Now we did actually mention something similar to this on a recent pod in respect of Aston Villa, when they were relegated from the Premier League in 2016. What they did is they just effectively took a giant amortisation charge that year, and the reason for that is that you're allowed to lose more money in the Premier League for financial fair play purposes, or profitability and sustainability, to give them the right names, than you are in the EFL. So any creative accountant worth his or her salt, if this Derby case is proven to be acceptable, now it's open doors as to whatever you want to do. The only thing we do appear to be having to deal with is the fact that it looks like financial fair play is going to be kicked out the window and replaced with some form of wage cap instead.
Right. Ryan Thomas has a question about his club, which is Swansea City, but it's one I'm actually interested to hear answered as a Palace fan. As Ryan says, over recent years, Swansea that has been purchased by American owners who seem to have sold a lot of players and refused to spend any money off the back of it. How does Swansea stand financially, as the Americans are claiming poverty despite all the recent Premier League and parachute money?
Well, I mean, Ryan's absolutely right. Swansea have benefited substantially from their existence and former existence within the Premier League. Having said that, over the course of the last 5 years, they actually managed to lose £124 million, wow, despite their elevated status. Now, normally, if you're losing money, you've got two potential ways of dealing with this. First of all, the owners can put the money in to effectively, heal those losses, to make sure that you've got sufficient money to allow the club to operate on a day-to-day basis. The alternative is to sell players, and the reason why the owners haven't put a penny into the club is that the £124 million worth of losses have been covered by £138 million of profits on player sales, which means it's tough to be a Swansea fan, because every time you've got a player who's shown promise, then off he goes elsewhere. And we've seen the likes of James and McBurney was there as well, I think,
Yeah.
and other players, Sigmundsson and so on. So it's a struggle for the club, because if you lose your best two players every season to another Premier League club, or if you're in the Championship, a Premier League club just nicks them, to actually have a team of the quality to progress on the pitch becomes increasingly difficult.
Yeah, and the reason I say it's of interest to me as a Palace fan is because we have Harris and Blitzer, two hugely wealthy Americans who are major investors in the club, who 3 seasons ago had all sorts of ideas, none of which have been fulfilled, although in the meantime they seem to have acquired several other American sports clubs. It's slightly worrying as a Palace fan that we seem to be on their back burner even while we're in the Premier League, let alone before we go in the Championship. And it seems quite a few American owners who are happy to get involved in the glamour, but then sort of seem to step back a little bit.
Yes, we've seen, especially over the course of the last two or 3 years, the major international investment as far as English football is concerned. It's gone away from China and towards the US, and that's partly due to the fact that high net worth American individuals, they see the popularity of English football because it's now on American TV. That they see some of the stratospheric numbers involved. They get in, they dip their toe in the water and then quickly realise that the majority of clubs are actually still losing money, and then they do lose interest. And what they're trying to do is to find a useful idiot to buy the club off them and still make a profit. And there are huge numbers of people involved at present trying to buy football clubs. So it's a case of pass the toxic parcel to a certain extent and trying to mug somebody off.
Oh, that's good. That's when I remember you're from South London, when you use phrases like mug somebody off. Every now and again, the way you pronounce grass and bath really worries me. But then you say that and it's fine. Yeah, he's back. The Elephant and Castle kid is back. Now, our next question comes from Sebastian R. Fat. Now, my apologies, Sebastian, if I've pronounced your surname incorrectly. But Sebastian, Kieran, has taken us to places we have never been. And for you, Kieran, that's very unusual, as you've been to most places in all sorts of ways. We are going to Tier 3 of the Portuguese League, or if you prefer, Terceira Liga. There you go. Tier 3. Tier 3 is a new sort of supercharged Division 3 due to start in 2021, 2022. And it's of interest to Sebastian, he says, because a close friend, I understand, Sebastian, asking for a friend, don't worry, said a close friend supports SC Vianense, who were recently promoted from a regional league into the Campeonato de Portugal, or if you prefer, the Portuguese Third Division. As it is at the moment, would moving from the current Portuguese Third Division to this new supercharged Tier 3 plus affect clubs financially? Tier 3, those were the days, eh, Boris?
Will it affect them significantly? No, the answer will be no. Portuguese football is slightly unusual in the sense that clubs sell their broadcasting rights mainly on an individual club basis as opposed to a full league. So I think the problem for the Portuguese third tier is that it's not going to have any significant money coming in from the broadcasters. Therefore, you're going to be reliant upon local sponsors and fans turning up in respect of match day to provide funding. If the club is performing well, or if it's in a town or city which has a fan base who've always wanted to progress up the chain, then actually I think this could work in the club's favour. If not, then it could end up sort of as a ghost town club, and you would be worried about its long-term future, simply because we don't know what people are going to be like coming out of the pandemic. I mean, before we went on air, we were discussing the fact that even you or I, who've been watching our clubs for a ridiculous amount of time, are finding it difficult to get motivated for matches which should be important. But when you are watching them, it's got all of the excitement of a first round Carabao Cup game.
Yeah, although I have to say I was more motivated after we beat Fulham than after we surrendered to Wolves, I have to say. So that notion, Kieran, that in Portugal it's the clubs that negotiate their own broadcasting deal, that presumably means that Benfica and Sporting Lisbon are way, way, way wealthier than any other club in the First Division.
Yes, that is the case, and that reinforces existing gaps, and it makes it very difficult for a club, even with a new owner, to put in a genuine challenge. And we are seeing across Europe, with the exception of here in England, the increased concentration of wealth and power, and therefore winning of individual leagues within the hands of very, very few clubs.
Chris Frank. Chris says he's trying to get his head round FFP rules. Welcome to my world, Chris. In particular for his club Fulham and financial fair play treatment of promotion bonuses following their playoff success in 2017-18. EFL rules seem to say that promotion bonuses can be deferred to the following season, but Chris can't find an equivalent rule in the Premier League handbook. Does this mean the treatment of promotion bonus payments differs in the Premier League to the Championship? It's an interesting question, Kieran, because presumably it only applies to 3 of the 20 Premier League clubs at any one time, doesn't it?
It does. As far as the Premier League club is concerned, they're not bothered about promotion bonuses paid to clubs when they were in the Championship. Under EFL rules, if a profitability and sustainability calculation is being performed, you ignore promotion bonuses and that seems fair because it seems wrong to punish people on the back of being successful. So when you get to the Premier League, they say, what were the rules in the EFL? If they were excluded as far as the P&S calculation was concerned in the EFL, we will just take that EFL profitability and sustainability profit stroke loss, and we will use it in our figures, because what happens is that you're always assessed on a rolling 3-year period. So if you have just come up from the Championship, so if we take Leeds, for example, they've spent quite a few years in the Championship. They've now been promoted to the Premier League. And the way that it works is for every year of the 3 years you've been in the Championship, you're allowed a 13 million loss. And for every year in the Premier League, it will be 35. So therefore, for Leeds this season, let's just ignore COVID, it would be 61 million. And that's their allowable loss. And that's after taking into consideration all of these weird and wonderful adjustments for promotion and so
on. Kieran, before we answer my next question, the next question I'm going to ask you, it's not my question. I could ask you a question now, but I've asked you a lot of questions recently and I wasn't satisfied with the answers for some of them. Remember you had to apologise a couple of weeks ago for the strange buzzing noise in the background.
Yes.
I need to apologise. Some of you may have heard a strange noise in the background during one of the last questions. This is because, and I hesitate to explain this, I had to blow my nose. And it turns out that the tissue I used that was in my pocket was the same one I used to pick up some crisps that the cat tried to steal during Strictly Come Dancing. So I blew my nose and got a nose full of hula hoop crumbs, basically. Which was it's a slightly unpleasant basically I inhaled some barbecue beef crumbs on live on air. Essentially, I apologise for that, Kieran.
Well, I think that's a sign of the pandemic, Kevin, because for people who've been in showbiz, snorting things is part of the entertainment world, and now that you're having to resort to snort barbecue flavour hula hoops, is testament to how difficult the industry is finding the economy at present.
Yeah, that's a very good, if slightly untruthful way of putting it. It's more an indication of what happens in my house during Strictly Come Dancing. Really, occasionally, if a social worker happened to pop his head through my window while the cat was trying to steal crisps off a house, a table covered in wine bottles, while we watched mates dancing in Strictly Come Dancing. Yeah, I don't know why she suddenly likes. Anyways, Ian Hutchings is our next question. Actually, I might be onto something. Maybe I could become a powdered hula hoop crumb seller. as Rishi keeps wanting us to retrain, that could be my new job. I would not be short of clients in my industry, as you point out. Ian Hutchings says, my team, or his team, West Brom, recently had a player, Nathan Ferguson, move to Crystal Palace. What are the factors that a tribunal used to decide on the price? Because the price, undisclosed, was decided by a tribunal. Do tribunal decisions include structured payments, add-ons and sell-on clauses? And I would add to that, Kieran, that only Palace would buy a player who failed a fitness test the season before when they tried to buy him, knowing that he probably wouldn't be able to play football this season. So would the fact that he was injured, would that have been taken into account by the tribunal?
Yes, because what the tribunal looks at is, first of all, the age of the player, the length of his remaining contract, the number of games in which he has played over the last 12 to 24 months, if there have been any offers from other clubs. And then in terms of structuring the deal, what they are normally quite keen on is to make sure that there is compensation for the selling club, because normally the selling club doesn't want to let the player go. And that would be in the form of add-ons should Crystal Palace sell Nathan Ferguson at a future date. So all of that would have been included in the final ruling by the tribunal.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we seem to have been after him for about 3 years. And it seems there are all sorts of rumours that we were the only club that he would go to, which of course endeared us to him. But it's a strange one for Palace fans because at one stage of the season when we bought him, it looked like we would be starting the season with a 19-year-old left-back and a 20-year-old right-back, which would have been very exciting. But of course, Roy Hodgson reverted to type against Wolves, and we had Patrick Van Aanholt and Nathaniel Klein at fullbacks. There were about 174 between them, but never mind. Robert Peacock has asked an interesting question. It's one I don't think we've covered fully on this pod before. Robert Peacock says, the Brazilian FA have just brought in equal pay for their men and women's teams, which is very laudable. But how are players paid for international football? Is it an annual salary? They pay per game, flat fee, a mixture of that? And does this filter down to youth teams as well? Because it's never occurred to me to ask whether the England under-18 team were getting paid for appearing in tournaments or friendlies.
Yeah, it is an intriguing one, this. I mean, I've looked at all 612 pages of the FA handbook trying to get to the bottom of this, and I'm not necessarily any the wiser as a result in terms of youth players. I suspect they wouldn't be paid because this is very much deemed to be part of their development rather than as when you're in the full team squad. That's deemed to be at the end of your development. When it comes to England players, they are normally paid effectively a nominal fee of around about £2,000 per match, and that's for both men and women. My understanding is that all of the men and some of the women's team give that money to charity. They say, it's an honour to play for the country. We are, especially in the case of the men players, they are already well remunerated. £2,000. This isn't them being sniffy. £2,000, they're not going to miss. So it's very laudable that they give this to an organised charity. When it comes to tournaments, I think that they are paid on they are given a fee. So if they're going to the Europa League tournament or the Euro tournament or the World Cup, they will be given a fee because they're away from home for a month. And then there will be bonuses on, similar to match appearance bonuses, goal bonuses, and so on. In respect of other countries, FIFA does not give any overall guidance as to the nature as to how payments should be structured. And it's normally fairly common to see before any World Cup, sort of a week or 2 weeks before the tournament starts, there's normally at least one team who is refusing to go to the FIFA World Cup because their domestic football association has reneged on promises, or they find out that all of the officials are travelling first class and the players are in economy, and that's replicated for where they're staying in terms of accommodation and things of this nature.
So England pay male and female internationals the same money, do they?
That's right. So England agreed to that earlier this year. I think Brazil do, as Robert mentioned. I think New Zealand and Sweden and some other countries are also following that particular lead.
Good. I suppose it's slightly different for Brazil as well, because for years, traditionally, especially in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the Brazilian FA spent 9 months of the year like a sort of Harlem Globetrotters, didn't they? Travelling all over the world, playing international friendlies, cash in hand, more or less, didn't they?
But they did, and in fact, they still exploit the fact that Brazil are a huge draw.
Yeah.
So if they go on an international tour, you'll see them turning up at places such as Loftus Road, and slightly unusual. And these, Brazil versus Spain in West London, it's great. I'd probably go and watch it because. To see these players and to actually say that you've seen Brazil play football, I think for any football fan, it would be a dream come true. I remember seeing them in the 2006 World Cup in Germany, and for me, having like I suspect we all remember 1970,
of course,
and all that went along with that. It was sort of one of those moments that you'd always wanted to achieve.
Yeah, they actually played Plymouth Argyle in the 70s when they came over on a tour, and Plymouth offered them $5,000 cash in hand, is the story, to play them, and Plymouth beat them, Pelé and all, which is a fun fact you'll find in a book somebody's recently written. Lou Champion has been rewatching the Sunderland Till I Die documentary, and I want people at home listening to this to bear that in mind, because strangely enough it's going to crop up again. But Lou Champion has been rewatching the Sunderland Till I Die documentary, and in it, says Lou, Stewart Donald apparently has a 10% stake in Oxford, it's revealed. How is that possible when he owns Sunderland?
Right. You are not allowed to have an investment in more than one football club. Now, the investment is defined as owning more than, I think it's 9.9% or more than 10%.
Oh, okay.
So therefore, Stewart Donald is just within the threshold for making sure that he is not exceeding existing legislation.
So could Stewart Donald have a 9.9% stake in 10 or 12 football clubs then?
Yes, he could. I mean, if you take a look at Sky, many years ago, they owned 9.9% of Manchester United, and I think one or two other clubs as well. When the Premier League was sort of in its sort of creation years, because it helped them. It meant that they had potentially as a significant shareholder, but not a majority shareholder. They could have a sort of their ear to the door when decisions were being made.
Interesting. This next question, Kieran, comes from Akudinobi Kazarache. And in brackets before the start of the question, Akudinobi has added, "It's not a tongue twister, but I'll enjoy hearing you try." That's the calibre of listener we have, isn't it? I hope I've pronounced that right, Akudinobi. Please email me to tell me I haven't. Akudinobi is a Nigerian, and is puzzled by the fact that 90% of clubs in the Nigerian league are state-owned, with one owned by a church and another by a rich man. Is there any advantage in having government-run clubs, especially if they never seem to invest in them?
Right. The advantage here would be, I'd imagine, as a Palace fan, you've got a soft spot for Nigeria, as they're known as the Super Eagles.
Of course.
And they have some of the greatest football kits of all time.
Absolutely.
So as far as the domestic league is concerned, the government knows the benefit of the national team qualifying for the FIFA World Cup finals. Right. Therefore, it's important that they have a domestic league which is run on a reliable level. Now, because in Nigeria they don't have great TV deals as in terms of the income it generates, what they want to be certain about is that clubs don't become insolvent and you end up halfway through a season with one or two clubs going bust. Right. So by having the government run them, whilst the government's not putting money in, it's in a position to make sure that they don't go out of business. And this benefits the national team. I mean, Nigeria are currently ranked 29th in the FIFA rankings. And remember, they have been as high as 5th.
Yeah.
They are regular participants in the FIFA World Cup. And that is on the strength of having a domestic league, and also the government benefits, because if the players do quite well domestically, then there's a greater chance of them being spotted by scouts and moving on to careers elsewhere. where perhaps European or clubs in the Premier League and so on will be willing to pay decent fees. And of course, that benefits the government.
Well, of course it does. And it benefits the economy of Nigeria as well, because as Roy Hodgson always points out, African players are very diligent in sending money back to their families and their communities. So I would guess that the majority of the squad in a World Cup, though, for Nigerian players would be based overseas, wouldn't they, rather than in their domestic league?
Yes. I mean, certainly the coaches tend to want players. If you're good, the money paid in the domestic leagues isn't great in Nigeria. As soon as you move to Europe, and as we know that the Premier League, where the average salary is around about £2.7 million a year, that's going to be far greater than you could hope to get back home.
Now, Kieran, we've seen a bit of the world on this pod. We've been to Portugal, we've been to Nigeria. We're going to end with two questions from the USA, and the first of them is from Glenn Thaxton. Now, Glenn Thaxton is from Tennessee, and he sent us, Kieran, a lovely email explaining his very newfound love and passion for football, a sport he said that he spent years failing to understand and, in fact, disdaining a little. And all this was kick-started, oddly enough, by discovering Sunderland Till I Die during lockdown. And Glenn is now slightly obsessed and immersed into research in football culture. He loves the pod. And indeed, in his email, included some ideas for monetising it, which producer guy hadn't thought of. They're good ideas as well. Glenn asks a simple question from a newcomer, but he asked if Kieran, that's you, could offer your thoughts on the best run clubs. I don't know why I felt the need to specify that, in case that other silent Kieran that's been part of the pod for quite some time finally went, oh, my turn. Kieran Tierney has been sitting in on the pods for quite some time since he came down from Celtic. So if you, Kieran Maguire, could offer your thoughts on the best run club or clubs in the top level of football and what it is that those clubs do so well.
I presume Glenn here is thinking about best run financially.
Yes, of course.
In my view, as far as the Premier League is concerned, the two best run clubs financially on a consistent basis are Spurs and Burnley.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Spurs are superb at keeping costs low for a rich six club. I don't like to use. I'm becoming increasingly uncomfortable about using this phrase "Big Six" because you think about it. Leicester won the Premier League more recently than Manchester United, Arsenal, and Spurs. But Spurs are very good at cost control. In terms of their wages, their wage bill is £100 million lower than that of the two Manchester clubs, Chelsea and Liverpool. So that's quite an achievement, and yet they have got to the final of the Champions League. They were runners-up in the Premier League fairly recently themselves, and they've got normally a pretty good eye as far as the transfer market is concerned for generating cash as well. And the new stadium, again, setting pandemic aside, is one of the smartest investments I've seen in any form of professional sport over the course of the last couple of decades.
Go on, sorry, Ken.
And in terms of Burnley, you get what it says on the tin. They have a wage structure which, my understanding, is really close. So there's no. I think the dressing room term is there's no Billy Big Bollocks in it who are on 3 or 4 times the money of another player. Everybody's within a pretty close band of within $5,000 of top and lowest paid player, and they have a philosophy in terms of recruitment. They tend to look for hungry players with a bit of experience who have come from the Championship or elsewhere in the Premier League, and it's a fairly close knit club. And I think we mentioned earlier at the very start, in respect of the potential takeover, the existing owners haven't put a penny in.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Spurs wage bill being £100 million less or so than Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, because every football fan listening to this will be winking at themselves going, oh yeah, but legendarily Spurs top that up with bonuses. And I mean, that seems to be the perceived wisdom about Tottenham's wage structure, that they don't pay actually brilliant wages, but you can earn a shed load of money on top of that.
Well, you can, but that £100 million includes bonuses.
Oh, it does.
So that is the total.
Oh, good. Okay.
So they have. I would expect their wage bill to rise over the course of the next couple of years because, as we all know, Harry Kane signed a new contract. Mourinho's arrived, and he's not cheap. They've signed in Ndombele for 60-odd million, and if you're paying top dollar for player signings, then the agents are going to say, well, if you can afford to pay 68 million for the player, as far as the transfer fee is concerned, perhaps he ought to have something commensurate with that. So I do expect that gap to perhaps decline a wee bit, but that they certainly have been run very well financially. And people are going to hate me for saying this. Newcastle United.
Oh, well, okay. You very nearly got away with it. It's like Columbo from the 70s. You just turned back as you were leaving the door. You just turned back and went, one more thing. Okay. Can I personally say I'm Newcastle fans? These are the views of Kieran Maguire. I shall be in the back here blowing my nose on the crumb-filled tissue.
That's right. Well run financially in terms of making sure they break even. I think they could have been better run financially because, to me, Newcastle is the biggest lost opportunity in football, but they don't lose money.
Okay. Glenn, welcome to the family of football, and I will reply to your email properly, I promise. And we finish with another recent American convert to the beautiful game, Jacob Frick. Regular listeners will know that Jacob fell in love with football not that long ago and decided that he needed an English team to support and chose Hereford simply because he liked their crest, which is perfectly good reason to support a club, I think. Jacob says he watched Hereford win a pre-season friendly over the summer, and it featured several trialists who, to the best of my understanding, were unattached. Are trialists paid, says Jacob? If so, and if they are injured, how much? If they're injured during the trial, who would be responsible for their rehab? In short, what is the financial commitment of a club to a trialist and vice versa? And I believe a trialist scored a goal in the EFL yesterday, and I texted the estimable Mark Clement to ask him who it was, and I forgot to bring my phone in with me. So it's not just my point being, it's not just at non-league level that trialists are used by clubs.
Right. Well, if you're a trialist, it's what you're doing by appearing one of these matches. It's the equivalent of a job interview. Right. Now, do you get paid for a job interview?
Right. Okay. I'm guessing no. I don't know. No. It's been 30 years since I was in that world, so I guess.
No, exactly. The most these people can expect is expenses.
Right.
So if they are travelling from afar, if you're lucky, they might pay for your train fare and perhaps some accommodation and a bit of scram afterwards. In terms of injury risk, that is borne by the player himself.
Right. Okay.
So if they have an agent, if they do have the resources, I would certainly take out a personal insurance policy under these circumstances. They wouldn't be covered, I suspect, under the club's insurance policy because it could be that they arrive, they won't have had a medical, so therefore they might have a pre-existing condition, and no insurance company would pay out on that basis. And if I was the insurance company, I'd say, well, okay, he's done his hamstring. How do we know he didn't have a dodgy hamstring to begin with? So it would be very much on an own risk basis.
Yeah, and I suppose as well when you look at Phoenix teams when they first start, like AFC Wimbledon, and I think we'll probably be discussing on Thursday's pod Wimbledon's move back to Plough Lane, which is a marvellous, significant thing to happen. But or the new Bury club, I suppose when a club first starts as a Phoenix club, almost all the team will be trialists, won't they?
Yes, but everybody's trying to get a position to try to get some form of longer term deal. At most, you'd expect to get boot money at the lower leagues.
Okay, if you have a question for us, and as you've heard this week, it could be about Nigerian football, it could be about Portuguese third division football, it could be about the fallout of watching a Sunderland documentary during the pandemic. Who knows? Just ask us at questions@priceoffootball.com, and I'm going to leave you with Kieran to do the tawdry merchandise speech that I flatly refused to do. Point blank, absolutely wouldn't do it. And I said that to Guy's face via an email.
Yes, folks, if you do like the show and you want to support it, and in many ways, just saying something nice on Apple Podcasts and giving us a 5-star review, that's more than suffice. But if you'd like some Price of Football merchandise, of which there is a unique and limited range consisting of 2 T-shirts and a mug at present. But we've been promised that if successful, we will expand the range. Then I think the goods go on sale at the end of the month. But the perfect Christmas present for nobody who I can possibly think of.
I'll tell you who's going to be getting a lot of Price of Football mugs. All Guy's friends. That's who's going to be getting a lot of Price of Football mugs. Otherwise, he's only got a small garage, I understand. Otherwise, he won't be able to get the car out. Yeah, and also, speaking of Christmas, Kieran, if people are looking for presents, I'd rather buy a book, to be perfectly honest. I mean, both of us have got books out. I'd go for that. Although, having said that, if you're sitting there in your Price of Football T-shirt, drinking a nice cup of tea out of your Price of Football mug, whilst reading your Price of Football book and looking at my Who Are You book, that's the perfect Boxing Day there, isn't it?
I think so, yes, especially if, as Amazon will have back-to-back matches lasting the whole day. It'll give you something to watch during the advert breaks. And in respect to the books, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Ian, who is the local guy at the Chamber of Commerce here where I live in the little village. Ian's also a Palace fan, and he'd heard that the proceeds of the book, or the royalties from the book, are going to the Trussell Trust. He happens to be one of the people that organises this amazing charity, and he invited me along and the Baroness a couple of days ago, and we came out of it and we were practically crying. Oh. It was such a humbling experience. This organisation, it doesn't care who you are. As he said, you can be a person who's had a good job and you've lost it, and all of a sudden you've got a couple of kids and you don't know how you're going to feed yourself because your universal credit's not come through. You're waiting a check. Or it could be just for your regular Joes and the and the back axle of your car's gone. You've got a budget for your food each month, and now that's been eaten up because you've got to go and repair the car or your van, and without the car or the van. Organisations like this, and we've said this on more than one occasion, that they shouldn't have to exist in a country the size and the wealth of the UK. But we are where we are. There's 450 branches in the UK, and folks, if you're in a supermarket like Tesco's or Waitrose, and if you can afford to do so and you want to do so, just grab a couple of extra cans, and there's pickup points in huge numbers of supermarkets for the Trussell Trust. Just go and bung a couple of cans, or even a bar of chocolate. A lot of people during this horrible pandemic are suffering, and just put a smile on somebody's face to know that other people do care. This organisation does not judge you. It delivers food, and we're suffering enough. We don't want people to go hungry.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any point me adding this, Kieran, because Guy is such a heartless bastard. He's probably stopped the pod after our plea for you to buy mugs. But people around the world will be saying to themselves, hang on a second, Kieran lives in Sussex. There can't be food poverty in Sussex. And I was approached by a similar charity this time last year to ask me to raise some awareness for them. And I asked that exact question. And it turns out, of course, that there's no area of this country is immune to those problems. And also, all over Sussex are many new build estates in which they have affordable elements, and local councils all over Sussex have basically bunged council tenants into these estates that are situated a long way from hamlets and villages. So there's all sorts of issues around isolation and people not being able to afford to buy the food in the delicatessens in those hamlets and villages. So it is a problem for the whole of the country. As Kieran says, it shouldn't be. And I'm very pleased that Kieran could end on that positive, upbeat note.
Look after yourselves, boys and girls.
The price of football. The price of football.